Welcome. I think everyone can hear me on the Zoom in many different locations. Yes, oh, I'm getting a thumbs up. Good. I'm Becca Zirkin. I am one of the directors of Neighbors on Call. Welcome. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. My partner in crime, Susan Blunt, who usually does the introductions, is actually zooming in from RGU right now. And I know she's very sorry that she's not here with all of us in person. And she says she'll make it up to us by coming twice to the next one. So tonight we are trying something new. All of you folks out there and our panelists have come together from 3 different venues and on Zoom. So Senator Natalie Murdock is here with us in Pittsboro. And yay! And Representative Ray Jeffers is with the crew in Durham. Representative Marcia Morey is with the folks in Chapel Hill, and Representative Brandon Lofton is on the Zoom from Mecklenburg. So this event took enormous group effort, and I want to thank everyone who helped us hopefully pull it off. And we ask for forgiveness in advance for any glitches. We are definitely learning here. So I also just want to say that our site in Chatham is the most fun. So here we go. Neighbors on Call is, we have the best snacks. Neighbors on Call is an all-volunteer organization that helps elect Democrats to the state legislature. NOC is registered with the State Board of Elections as a partisan PAC. Our work falls into 2 broad buckets. First, our main focus is helping Democrats get into power and stay there. This is the campaigning bucket. So specifically, our primary effort is knocking doors to flip seats in the legislature and to protect vulnerable incumbents. We knocked about 25,000 doors in the last election cycle, and we're starting up again next month, which we'll talk about more later. Second, we also speak out to the people already in power to promote good policy, and more often to try to stop the bad stuff. And this is the advocacy bucket, which is focused on specific issues rather than on partisan matters. Advocacy is our topic for tonight, and it's important to note that when NOC members advocate on issues, we're following the lead of experienced advocacy organizations like Moms Demand Action or the NCGA. Those are the organizations that understand the issues the best. And unlike Neighbors on Call, those are nonpartisan groups. NOC doesn't coordinate directly with them because of our partisan status, but we do amplify their calls to action. And as individuals, we show up to support their work. So our goal tonight is to demystify advocating at the legislature to make all of you more comfortable and more willing to join in. When we join lobby days at the legislature, we don't have to know the particulars of the bills in question. The sponsoring organization coaches us on the relevant talking points. They tell us who to talk to. They have a strategy, and we are helping them execute it. What NOC provides to our members is support and camaraderie, as always. We make sure you have all the logistics information, point people to welcome you, a carpool option, stuff like that. So the thing that we're all wondering is, can our activism make a difference in the short term on legislation in this session, either by changing a legislator's mind or by encouraging Democrats to stick together to uphold the governor's veto? And can we make a difference in the longer term by shining a light on what the Republicans are doing to support the case for electing more Democrats in the future? So I'm excited to hear about this from all our speakers. And in a few minutes, I'm just going to let you know we're going to close the chat so we can all focus on the panelists. Later, if time allows, we will be taking some audience questions. If you're in person with us, you'll be texting them to someone on your phone. We'll tell you about that later. And if you're on the chat, we'll reopen. If you're in Zoom, we'll reopen the chat for that. So we'll cross that bridge later. But for now, I am going to pass the mic to Jonah Garson. He is the first vice chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party. Yay! Who is, I see lots of clapping in the Zoom for very good reason, who is joining us from the Chapel Hill venue. And he's going to introduce our speakers. So Jonah, if you're out there, I am passing it to you.
I'm out here, Becca. Hey, everyone. This is Jonah Garson, coming in from the Seymour Center. One thing that Becca or Susan won't say is that they've also, through Neighbors on Call, had this really critical role in driving the conversation in this state's Democratic circles about what reforms we need, what changes we need to change this state's balance of power. But they really have been instrumental in all of that. And for that, I personally give them my thanks, and we all give them our thanks. So I'm in charge. The first thing I'm supposed to do in the outline I've been given by the Neighbors Call folks on high is to sort of give a level set of where we are in the state politically. And frankly, it's not a happy story. So right now, we have a state Supreme Court where we have 5 conservative justices, 5 Republican justices, and 2 Democratic justices. So Democrats lost the majority on that court. We lost this democracy forward, abortion rights protected majority on the court, which was one of our most profound losses of the past election cycle. We do have a Democratic governor, and that governor is up for election, or we have a gubernatorial election in 2024. Josh Stein has announced that he is running as a Democratic candidate for that seat. We have in our North Carolina General Assembly a Republican supermajority in the North Carolina Senate that can override Governor Cooper's veto. We are 1 seat shy of a Republican supermajority in the North Carolina House. To override a veto, we need both chambers would have a supermajority. Republicans have to have a supermajority to override veto. Democrats are holding on by a thread. That thread in the North Carolina House. And the governor's veto, incidentally, our governor, and this is a historical fact, our governor only got the veto, I think, in the early 90s in the state of North Carolina. We've always had a strong General Assembly, and maybe an overly strong General Assembly constitutionally, and a fairly weak governor. Our governor's veto is only as good as the House Democrats specifically make it. We need Democrats in the House to hold together to sustain Governor Cooper's veto. 2024, we have all of our state legislative races up, in addition to this big top of ticket race, the gubernatorial race, and of course the presidential race. We need to make sure that Democrats in these legislative races claw back from the brink where we are right now, so that we are really in a place to sustain our next Democratic governor's veto in both the North Carolina Senate and the North Carolina House. We have our work cut out for us. We have a Democratic Party now in the state that is committed to making the state legislative fight, along with the judicial fight, along with the other Council of State fights, at the top of the ticket, right along with the rest of the top of the ticket. My next job, before I hand off, is to introduce our amazing panelists this evening. We are joined by some legislative champs. They are spread out, as you've heard, between Durham and Meck and Orange County. We have Senator Natalie Murdock of Durham. She's represented Senate District 20 since 2020. As of 2022, her district includes Chatham County. We have Representative Marcia Morey. In the North Carolina House, she's our House Dem Whip. And wit, I'm sure. She is our House Dem Wit. Representative Morey has a district, House District 30, which covers Durham and east central portion of Durham County. Representative Ray Jeffers flipped House District 2. Round of applause for Representative Ray Jeffers. From red to blue in November. His district stretches from North Durham through Perkin County up to the Virginia line. Finally, we have Representative Brandon Lofton. He's in the Democratic House. He's our legislative chair. He's serving his 3rd term representing HD 104 just south of Charlotte in Mac. Give a round of applause for all of those folks coming in hot from across the state. Well, my part in this, and my part is sort of setting the scene and bellowing at y'all in this hybrid Zoom meeting is over. I am supposed to now hand it off to the inimitable Susan Lindsay of Neighbors on Call, who's going to take forward our moderated discussion portion of the evening. Susan.
Thank you, Jonah, and thank you all for being here. Before we talk more about the nuts and bolts of how the legislature works, I would like to ask all of you guys briefly, what are the big issues that you see coming down the pike towards us that we should be on the lookout for, and where are they in the process that we're going to talk about more later? Senator Murdock, would you like to start?
Right, that is a pretty big question, but sure, I'm happy to get the ball rolling with that. I know all of our colleagues probably have different perspectives of what's coming, but I think more than anything in the Senate, as we know, we do have a much more of a challenge in the House, in that we fell short by one seat, so we are in the super minority by one. So in my opinion, I know earlier we opened the conversation with what should we do as far as shedding light on the bad things that are happening, and that is something that we are laser focused on. Since we don't have the numbers to uphold vetoes by Governor Cooper, it is that much more important that our messaging is really strong, that we're communicating with people like you to say, these are all the things that are going on, because the first 2 weeks alone, there were a lot of bad bills moving very quickly. So it was really on us to get the word out of what was going on. What do these things mean? Because the other side really banks on folks being confused by so many bad things happening at one time. It's difficult to even organize folks to say, what should they focus on as far as all the phenomenal groups like you that we work with, but some big ones that have already come forward. Gun safety and reform will be a really, really big one. That's something that I spoke against in the Senate, to repeal pistol permits. Just to give you a little anecdote, in Durham County alone, let alone all 100 counties, when we checked in with our sheriff, he has declined in 1 year, rejected over 100 of those pistol permits, when he did that additional check to say, hey, I think that there are other things in your record that are concerning to me. I don't think that it's safe for you to have access to a firearm. So if you multiply that for 100 counties, we know just in one county, over 100. So gun safety will always be one. And we knew that that was one, with them picking up a few more seats, that they would continue to make it even easier to get hands on firearms, when we already have a system in place that should be strengthened and not weakened. So we definitely know that was one. Goes without question, reproductive rights, one of the big reasons that I even ran for office. I remember the infamous motorcycle bill. I was living in Asheville at the time, and all of my friends, we were just horrified at the thought of these mostly men in Raleigh telling us what we could and cannot do with our bodies. So obviously we are still awaiting to see kind of what time frame will they settle on. It could be anything from 6 to 15 weeks. Currently, abortions are safe and legal through 20 weeks, but it is my belief that all of those bans are arbitrary and harmful. And when you talk to physicians, it really makes it difficult for them to do their job, and quite frankly, puts them in a position to commit malpractice, to say that we can't do what we medically think is necessary. And that is concerning. So definitely reproductive rights. Voting rights will be the last one that I'll plug. We have co-filed a suite of legislation to protect voting rights in the House and Senate. So we've co-filed a lot of those that we stand in solidarity. I'm a primary sponsor on one of those, but we already have a bill out of the House where they want to shorten early voting to 7 days. We knew they were going to refile the election integrity bill, which will make it harder for your ballots to count if they're received after a certain time, but that will literally result in thousands of ballots being thrown in the trash. So I definitely would say, for me, those are the top 3 things to look out for. And we'll close with, it's just all the more reason that we really need organizations like you to help us get the word out, because we are juggling, various pieces of legislation and commitments and committee meetings. And so we do what we can to get the word out through events like this and social media, but it really will take that grassroots effort to communicate with all of your networks that we can't reach. There are people that you can reach that believe you before anyone else, because they know you. So we really, really are dependent on you to help us get the word out about what's going on.
That's terrific. Would anybody like to say something about where we are in Medicaid?
Yeah,
I
well,
would really like that.
happy to go on. Today in the House, we passed Medicaid, and so it is going to the governor's desk. Now, the actual implementation will be tied to passage of the budget. So they have a big hook in Medicaid. So the budget has to pass, and then everything will go forward. But it was a big hurdle. It's been 10 years. We've been pushing for it. That's great. Other things, I think the budget's going to be big. It's coming very soon, faster than it has in any other session, and it's going to be rolled out next week. As you know, we started out big. A senator said that we had the CRT bill. It was called Equality in Education yesterday. So the better a bill sounds, the worse it is. And it's adopted from Florida. And it's you cannot teach anything in schools that would make a child uncomfortable based on race or sex. Every Democrat stood together, 49 of us all opposed the bill. That was a wonderful showing of unity. So I think the governor will veto that bill. The ICE bill, the rioting bill, the governor, as you may know, let go through the rioting bill without his signature. And that was because he saw the numbers. One of the Democrats was a co-sponsor. He did not think we could sustain his veto, so it became law without his signature. We worked to improve it a little bit. We nibbled around the edges and got the amount of damages up and the time in jail without bond short. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do now, make bad bills a little less bad. Those are just a few of the ideas, and I'll throw it over to Ray.
Well, thank you. And I think you all covered pretty much all of it, I think. But the biggest thing is, or the simplest way to put it is, all the bad legislation that the governor vetoed, we're starting to see it come back. And Marcia, you mentioned Representative Morey, you mentioned the budget. I think we will see a budget that will not meet the needs of our educators, that will not meet the needs of our capital needs in our schools and our universities. And by tying that Medicaid, which they know we want it to it, they're going to have, we're going to have to, I think, decide what can we live with this time to go ahead and get it done. But I think you all summed it up pretty well. I mean, we're going to see all of that. Was it 50 some vetoes the governor's had since he's been in office? I think we're going to see a lot of that bad legislation come back to the table.
Representative Lofton.
Yeah, I think, well, first, thank you guys for having all of us and putting this together. I think my colleagues summed it up really well, particularly the budget that's coming up that is going to be released next week. I think you'll see my fear is that we'll see all of that rolled into the budget that we have coming up. There is a reason why Medicaid expansion was tied to the budget, and in the context of when we are hyper-focused, as we should be, on protecting voting rights, on protecting reproductive freedom. I think we need to be vigilant in making sure that that stays out of our budget. And so it'll be critical for all of us as Democrats to hold tight and make sure that we can sustain a veto so that we can protect those rights. And not sacrifice those to do something that is a no-brainer that everyone knows we need to do, which is expand Medicaid. So I think that's one of the key things. The other thing, obviously, for many North Carolina families right now who don't have teachers in their classrooms, who are dealing with staffing shortages in early childhood, our courts, our prosecutors, don't have enough staff to be able to push cases through in a timely manner. These are things that will all be impacted by the budget. We have the ability to make a significant effort to close that gap and serve the needs of our communities. And I think it'll be a matter of, will we put our families first or will we put other interests first? And I think that's something we'll have to make sure we stand strong on as Democrats.
Thank you. So now let's talk a little bit more about how the General Assembly works so that we know kind of what we're doing. Representative Jeffers, we are really glad that you got elected in November. We'd like to talk with you a little bit about what life at the legislature is like. So I want to know what has surprised you the most about your new job as a legislator.
The cafeteria has pretty good food. And it's pretty well priced. It's pretty well priced, and for our salary, I'm glad that it is.
Well, I was going to ask about that. Is this a full-time job, and how much do you get paid?
No, we're a citizen legislature, and it's the yearly salary is what, about almost $14,000, I think. And we get a little per diem. And the funny thing that we learned in orientation was you get mileage once a week, and it's 33 cents a mile. And I think they told us that was the 94 federal rate.
Oh.
So that was a shock, I think, to some. And if you live within 52 miles, I think, of the legislature, all of that is taxed. So.
Wow, wow, what a great deal. I bet it comes with health insurance and all this other good stuff, right?
It does. You do get state benefits.
Oh, thank goodness, because you're not getting paid enough. So what kind of accommodations did you get? Are you on the back road? Do you have an office window?
I've got a funny story about my office. So I wanted to be in the legislative building. I just like to see, it was very packed yesterday. The kids are coming through. It's very, we had several groups there yesterday, and I kind of like all of that. And so my office is in the 1300 quadrant. So right when you come in the front door to the left. And when we got assigned our offices, I went by to check out my new digs, and I said, "Oh, I got a window." That was a plus. But all I had was a trash can and a recycling bin. So the next week I had a trash can, a recycling bin, and a telephone, all sitting in the floor. And then we got sworn in, and I said, well, I'm just a freshman. They're going to get to me. I got sworn in. I still only had trash can, recycling bin, and a telephone. And so after a week, next week, we're going to get to work. So I said, I better tell somebody. And so I found out who I needed to call, and I went over and to their office, and I said, hi, I'm Representative Jeffers. I'm in 1319, and I don't have anything in my office. And she said, are you sure, honey? I said, yes, ma'am. So she said, well, I'll walk with you over. So when I opened my door, she said, sweetie, you sure don't. And so, but it worked out because everybody had swapped and got this desk and this bookcase and this chair. So there was nothing left for me. So I got everything new. So I got a new chair and a new desk. So all of my Durham delegation, they're all envious of me.
Oh, golly. All right. Now to some of the mechanics of the NCGA. So Representative Lofton, you are the legislative chair of the Democratic Caucus, right?
Yes.
What is that, first of all?
Well, I think it's similar to an introduction about Neighbors on Call, how you broke it down between the two buckets, right? You had a campaign bucket, and then you had an advocacy/policy bucket. So if you think about the House caucus, we have a campaign side, trying to recruit to get people elected, and then we have a legislative side. And on the legislative side, we have subject matter experts. So Representative Morey is a subject matter expert in Judiciary 3. So we have Democratic chairs for each committee, and they're in charge of making sure that the caucus is aware of controversial bills coming through those committees, helping to work with partners and coordinate debate. And my job essentially is to provide support for all of our shadow chairs, all of our subject matter experts, and then help the caucus think through floor strategy, rules issues, amendments. Also, you heard Senator Murdock earlier mention the coordination between the House and the Senate. And so we work together. My job is to help coordinate those efforts in terms of our agenda bills. So to codify Roe bill, the democracy bill we filed. We're working on a couple of others that we'll talk about, or you'll see come through later. So these are things that are kind of in my wheelhouse to help coordinate. So basically just providing support for our legislative work.
Big job. Can you outline for us how a bill becomes a law in Carolina? From the first meeting to the governor's desk, a little slide will go. But it would be great if you could walk us through that.
Yeah, so before you get to the first reading, obviously you file your bill, and you can have, in the House, you can have 4 primary sponsors on a bill. which is important because if, obviously, like we are, the Republicans are in the majority. If you file a bill that has all Democrats on it, it probably is going to stop after that first step, the passes first reading. So you need to have it. So who you have as your primary sponsors matters. So you file that, you try to get co-sponsors, then it gets its first reading and it gets assigned to a committee. It can go either straight to rules or it can go to one or more committee before it reaches rules. If it goes straight to rules, I think it's funny you have the skull and crossbones there. I think for Democrats, that is certainly a strong indication that your bill is dead. But if you're in the majority, it may actually be a good sign if your bill goes straight to rules, because it means they're trying to fast track it. And sometimes if you're a Democrat, you can catch the signal that your bill is going nowhere if it goes straight to rules, or sometimes if the speaker is particularly upset with you, you might have 10 or 12 committees you have to make it through before you get to rules, just to send the strong signal. So once it comes out of committee, if it gets a favorable report, then it's eligible to be calendared and put on the floor. Whether it actually makes it to the floor, obviously, is within the speaker's discretion about whether he decides to bring the bill up for a vote. And then obviously, if it passes second reading, then we do our third reading, and then it goes over to the Senate for the Senate to take up.
Wow. Can you explain to us what crossover means and why that's so important?
Yeah, so May 4th, I think, is our crossover date this year, and that's the date on the House side where all bills have to make it out of the House. And it's one of the surprising things to me when I first got elected is to think about you have a 2-year term, but essentially all your work in terms of getting things through has to happen by May of that first term. I mean, that's pretty much it. You can introduce new legislation in a short session, but there are certain rules that restrict the kinds of bills you can introduce, and typically it's just finance or budget related. But most of the bills that we would all consider wanting to run, you need to run those in the first few months while you're here. As a matter of fact, the request drafting deadline to even get those bills started has already passed for most of those bills. So we're already in a situation where, for this whole session, all the work that you're going to be doing in terms of getting legislation passed and coming up with ideas, is the deadline is pretty much passed for getting those things in and starting that process for most of us. If you're in a majority party, there are creative ways that they use to kind of use different vehicles. They take a bill that's passed crossover and gut and replace it with something else. But for most of us, unless you get it draft request in by now and passed out of the House by May 4th, then it's not going to happen for the term. So it really front loads a lot of that work.
Wow. I was going to ask you if there was a way to tell whether or not, whether you could predict a bill's progress, but you kind of explained that in terms of either being assigned to every committee or being assigned only to the Rules Committee where you'll go and die. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a good signal, that if your bill just goes straight to rules, that, if you're a Democrat, then you probably won't see it move. And if it gets, like I said, 6, 7, 8 committees, that could be a signal to you that for some reason someone's not happy with what you're doing.
They want you to be spanked by 6 committees.
Yeah.
So would anybody else like to add anything to this description of how, it's,
I think even though we are filing bills furiously, and filed Codified versus Wade, filed a lot of gun bills, gun safety bills, red flag, store your gun in a truck or a car safely in a container in a box. They go to rules, but we're messaging. These are our priorities. This is what we believe the Democrats' values are. The right, of unions to organize. I have a list of 9 bills. One has not gone to rules. and that's called White Cane Law, blind people to cross the streets safely. So I'm heading on my White Cane Law.
All right. I'm glad you brought that up about trying to get the message out about what we stand for and what we're trying to do. Because Senator Murdock.
One more piece I would add with the process of bills that really bugs me. And I guess I just care too much about local communities. Even if we were in power, I wouldn't have it in me to do with the local communities, since now I serve 2 counties. Of all the things that upset me, it's the difficulty of getting local bills through. If your local government says X, Y, and Z is really important to us and it makes sense, we should not have to fight for local bills. I think that's something that the general public probably isn't aware of, but if it's something either specifically for your community or up to a certain amount of counties, is considered a quote unquote local bill and can even only require a voice vote once it comes to the floor. So it could be changing terms for how people run. In Durham, we had a really simple one of just providing more days to appoint someone to a vacancy in city council, because we had one at the height of COVID and we didn't want to rush the process. People couldn't get in city hall. They couldn't physically meet the candidates. So we just wanted more time to provide these appointments. Luckily, that one actually made it out of the Senate, made it through 2 committees in the House. Then at the end of session, they gutted it to do something else with the bill, but something that minor to just say, we just want 30 more days to fill vacancies on city council, or something simple. So for me, I'm always frustrated at how difficult it is to just do basic local things for your community. If you are in the majority, there's so much you can do just through a simple local bill. So that's something that also upsets me about kind of the flow of bills. And it's honestly, in my opinion, from the research I've done even worse than it is in some other states. They're really heavy-handed with what we can't get through. Particularly for those of us in urban areas, we represent a lot of people. So when we can't get that done, I don't think it's reflective of the fact that those folks are paying tax dollars, they're voting, they just want basic services, and we should be able to provide that. But that's just me.
So I had a bill this week that went straight to rules, and I'm new and I knew what it meant, but it was a volunteer firefighter bill that would exclude them from property tax up to $45,000 on their main dwelling and 1 acre. But what I'm taking the good with the bad and say, I had probably more Republican co-sponsors on that bill than I did Democrat. So that kind of gives me a view of who I may can work with next time on this bill to see how to make it better, how to get it, get some more of them to primary it with me to be able to get it through hopefully next time. So I'm trying to look at the positive with it.
Senator Murdock, I'd like to talk a little bit about effective and ineffective ways to advocate for things. And I wanted to ask you if, sometimes I think advocacy is about trying to change legislators' minds. This is not going to work a whole lot in this session. But sometimes it seems like what it is related to that getting our message out, which is it's part of a strategy to elect more Democrats in the future by shining a big bright light on what the Republican majority is, how it's harming the state. So do you agree with that there's both those pieces with the advocacy?
I look at advocacy in a number of ways. I will start with the positive. The messenger matters. So it'll be 3 years from me, April 1st. And every session, there are things that make it through that really surprise me. For example, and honestly, I can't say why I wasn't in favor of it. I won't get into all that, but there was an instance where there was a domestic violence background and story around a certain individual. They started a nonprofit and ended up getting funding from the General Assembly. Of course, I support domestic violence organizations getting funding, and that's why I opposed it, because I used to work at the Department of Justice and know how many nonprofits we have that do that amazing work, and felt that they should get that funding instead of us giving it to a nonprofit that was pretty new. But lo and behold, there was a report released last year, and that funding actually is doing really well. It's doing a lot of good in the community. So use that as an example, because it was just, a really heartbreaking, tragic story, and the family shared it with various members and just kind of did the work and got it in the hands and the eyes of the right people. So sometimes you will see that happen. I think we passed one like that last year around elevator safety. So every now and again, you will have topics that just kind of break through, in the session. You see it every single session. So with advocacy, what I will say is, if it's not something that's overtly partisan, there are ways where groups, organizations can kind of band together, get the ear of the right folks in the majority, and maybe work with a handful of folks in the minority behind the scenes, and you can actually get some of that stuff done. One more positive before I get to the role of why we need all of you. I was able to do that last session around menstrual products. I saw in red states like Georgia, they provided $1 million in funding. 1 in 4 young people who menstruate cannot afford those products. It may seem like it's not a big deal, but there are national studies that have shown it's actually preventing young girls from going to school because they cannot afford the products. So I always reference red states when I go to the majority. So I was able to say, hey, in Georgia, they're appropriating $1 million for this. It's been really successful. Talk with the Department of Public Instruction about it. They said, hey, we should really look into this. We know the numbers are really terrible. And DPI provided it as a budget request. I worked with our education chairs in the Senate. So it made it in the Senate budget. So it actually was in a bill that I filed, but I worked it through the budget process. And we almost lost it in conference because of the House, but we were able to maintain it. And so this last budget cycle, we actually got recurring funding, not a ton of money, but it was enough so that over 135 schools have applied for the funding, including Chatham County. So Chatham County got a $5,000 grant for that. So there are times when you can do that. So as legislators, we have to be advocates, but when it comes to organizations, like Neighbors on Call with the advocacy, I think it definitely is shedding a light. And I think it includes not just physically coming to the building, but events like this. There's 70 folks on virtually. We're at various organizations. So around 100 people gathering, that is powerful. You will go home, you'll talk with your neighbors, you'll post on social media. You will help us get the word out because we are one person. And we can't lead if there's no one to lead. And to your point, the more that you shine a light on the really bad things that are happening, it can really help us to drive home around campaign time why folks need to vote in different ways. I also think advocacy is important because it gets people outside of simply the election cycle. Gone are the days you can just show up 3 months before an election. Advocacy really allows that 365 days a year to say, we want you to know what's going on. We want to get the information out there. If you missed that this terrible bill passed or this terrible thing was done. And what I'm hopeful that is different about this year is what we just said. We've already seen 2 horrible bills that became law. Why? Because we don't have veto power. So I hate that it took this, but I'm hopeful that people see the power of the veto pen and to see how harmful it is when these things are passed into law. I think it's one thing to say, oh, they upheld a veto. These laws are actually going to impact people's lives. The rioting bill, we know, will have a disproportionate impact on communities of color, a felony that will follow them for the rest of their lives. So I'm hopeful that folks will say, I get it. We're going to work that much harder. We're going to phone bank that much more, knock on that many doors to give us in the Senate that 1 seat we need to uphold vetoes again.
So can I ask all of you, all the rest of you, what type of advocacy that you've seen has been the most effective, and what are things that are not effective?
People coming down to the General Assembly, if you're able to do it on issues you care about. So many issues we don't know. Today, I had advocates from Justice Center talk about there's a big Blue Cross Blue Shield bill coming, and it's about a conversion 10 years ago and what's coming up. They educated me, and they help be very persuasive. But meeting people, things they care about, sitting down, talking to them, getting emails from your constituents, is very big. If you get emails that are outside your district, I mean, they're important, but I think you pay a priority to them. But having people come down really means a lot. It takes an effort from you all, but it means a lot to us too.
Thank you. Is it ever better for us to not shine light on a bill to avoid making noise or being seen?
They tell me to shut up a lot of times, not to talk about something, but
Okay.
no,
Yeah, I don't think
know.
it's necessarily harmful for the groups, but us as legislators, there are times that if we think we're going to get something done, we actually are not very public about it. We don't do interviews about it. There's something I'm working on now that I don't talk about. So individually, there are things that we don't want it to be harmful. But with the menstrual products, I said, hey, we really want to just kind of include this as a press conference. Is it okay? They said, we totally get it. It's fine. And we still got it in the budget. But I don't think there's a lot of harm, particularly for your organization. I think you all do a phenomenal job. So I think it's more so of continuing to do what you're already doing.
So Representative Jeffers, is if we know our legislators on the right side of the issue, is it helpful? Is it useful for us to contact you, or does it just create a burden for your office?
I missed kind of the first part. You were going in and out, but I think it was just around advocacy. If it's the best way about doing it, I guess, contacting us.
No, it was if we know you're on the right side of the issue, if we know that you're going to vote like we would like for you to vote, is it useful for us to contact you, or is that just create more, you have a lot to do?
No, I think so. I do a lot of federal advocacy for farmers and small farms, and we do a lot of advocacy training to those farmers when they're going talking to their congressional staff. And what I always tell them is it's great to share that personal story. And so even though I'm probably going to vote that way, if you share that story with me, and it's just another reason I might can go to a member that may have not made their mind up and kind of share that same story and maybe hopefully convince them or kind of let them know how important it is to others or how it could impact others.
Right. Representative Lofton, one of the things that happens during types of issues such as redistricting, there's public comment that is allowed. Can you talk to us a little bit about what public comment is and how we can impact decisions in this way?
Yeah, so public comment, going back to what Representative Jeffers said, is a really effective way where you can come up and make your personal story heard, not just in one-on-one conversations, but actually state it publicly and have that input taken in by the committee. In terms of redistricting, last time there were, I guess, different sessions throughout the state where they had these listening sessions where members of the public can come up and offer input. I don't know if they'll follow that process this time. I haven't heard anything about how that will unfold this time around, but I absolutely think it's going to be critical to make sure all voices are heard during that process. Because, I think without fail, the consistent thing you hear through all those sessions is that people want fair maps and they want districts that reflect them and not the designs of one party trying to hold on to power. And so I think it's going to be critical to have all those voices in the room. And so it's not just something that we're saying in opposition to maps or whatever the issue is, but so your actual experiences and the voice of the constituents is getting on the record.
Is there any possibility, even if, a lot of public comment is made, but it doesn't change the decision, that could play into that it could become part of a lawsuit that takes place afterwards?
I can't really speak to the likelihood of that impacting a lawsuit, particularly with, like we talked about at the very beginning, the change of the courts. I think our main focus right now has to be making sure that all the voices are heard and are loud and getting reported on and shining. And again, taking a long-term view. I think all of us right now in the General Assembly are taking a medium to long-term view that right now we're laying the groundwork for future success, that we're holding the line to stop, the craziest of the crazy and trying to lay the groundwork for future success. And that's going to require filing the bills, even if they go to Representative Morey's point, even if they go straight to rules. But it's important to state that value like we did with a lot of our agenda bills as well, and we'll continue to do. So I think, I can't speak on having a backup court strategy and how effective that would be in this environment with the changeover in the court, but I can say for sure, we need to make sure that we amplify our voices and speak more loudly than ever before, to especially around redistricting issues.
Representative Morey.
You can call me Marcia.
Marcia, what, you are the House Whip. Can you explain to us what the whip does? The witty whip.
Was that it?
No, well, that's one.
Well, and the Senate has their rules, the House has its rules. In our bylaws for the House Democrats that we will be voting on, we allow for election of whips, and it can be 3 to 5 whips depending on the size. This year I was elected one of 3 whips. And whips kind of mean you get your group, we split it into thirds, about 15 or 16. And we make sure as votes come up, we know where they will be voting, how they will be voting. If it's a caucus position, we will try to be very persuasive. So we are all voting in a like manner. It's a friendly whip. It is not a strong whip. But
You are a vote counter.
I'm a vote counter.
All right. So last election cycle, we knocked on about 25,000 doors trying to protect the governor's veto from being overridden. But we've already seen this session, the Democrats aren't always holding together, which is really critical in the House. So we've talked a little bit already here about the rioting bill, the anti-rioting bill that Governor Cooper didn't veto this time because he knew that it would be overridden because 6 Democrats in the House and 1 in the Senate voted for the anti-rioting bill. There are ways that we as advocates can help to hold the Democrats together. Issues like that. What can we do?
Well, it's very tough. I mean, just the numbers alone, the Senate can override any veto by the numbers if they're straight party lines. In the House, we have a 1 vote cushion. But if you look, when we organized, the Speaker of the House put a few of the Democrats as chairs of committees. Well, he didn't do that just gratuitously. He expects something.
Right.
And so I think some of those Democrats will, lean toward a veto override. But I think also we are much more strong and unified sustaining the governor's veto than on individual bills, how we vote. So we will be seeing the 2 bills that became law without his signature. We will probably see, and my colleagues may have different ideas, that the gun bill come up, pretty soon. When he vetoes it, and the rules of the House are really going to be tough, because now, as soon as the governor vetoes it, it can be put on a calendar the same day, and they will call a vote. If someone is at a funeral, if someone is sick on our side, that may switch, if we can sustain it or not. Or it's put in a veto garage. So every day it can be called up, even though it's not on the calendar. So they wrote the rules very draconianly so they can get what they want. But we have to have 2/3 of members present to be in their seat whenever they call it and vote together as a caucus. So it's going to be tough, but I think we're together, and I know all of us here are committed to do all we can.
So a lot of us don't live in the districts of some of the people who may be waffling. Is there anything we can do?
I'll ask my legislative leader. What do you think?
I think communication is always a good thing.
Yes. Right.
And
I know question. And you poor things have to live with this every day. So I'm going to try this. Thank you so much for talking with us and explaining the amazing reality of the General Assembly. So I'm going to turn this back over to Becca now.
Hi, we're going to pause for a minute. Thank you all so much. We're not done. We're pausing because our motto at Neighbors on Call is get together, learn together, act together. This is the act together part. So if you are at a site, you have a yellow sheet. If you're on Zoom, you're going to have a link to our website. And we're asking you to sign up right now for things. We're going to pause and then we'll come back to the program. So next week, here's what's coming up. Next week, Equality NC is hosting an advocacy day and a rally. If you would like to go to the advocacy day, you will need to contact the organization directly, and that's all on our website. But also, if you sign up through us, that's how you get all our built-in supports, our point person, our communications, all of that. And you can also go just to the rally and not to the advocacy day, which we believe is at 10:30. So RSVP to us in either case, because Paige Potter, our advocacy leader, will be keeping you updated. And there will certainly be other lobby day opportunities because, as Representative Lofton said, with crossover coming May 4th, we can expect that there will be a lot of opportunities before that. On April 27th, Neighbors on Call is going to host our next meeting. This is really about our other bucket that we were talking about. So it's called What's Next, Knock, and we're going to talk about our goals and strategy for this year. Senator Sidney Batch is going to join us, and Bree Bro from Online is going to join us too to talk a little bit, a little redistricting preview. So save that date. We aren't taking the RSVPs just yet because we got to get more details worked out, but save the date, April 27th in the evening. And then on April 29th, this is the long view that we're talking about. We are going to canvass with Senator Batch. We're right back out there on doors. It's in Wake County. She is in a vulnerable seat. We cannot afford to lose her. And the focus for the canvass is my personal favorite. It's constituent outreach, meaning we're just going to talk to voters and say, Senator Batch is your senator. She's available to help you. And is there anything that you want her to know? It's a really great way to talk to voters. If you're nervous about it, do not worry. You can sign up as a silent canvasser and then your partner does all the talking. So take out your calendars right now, fill out your yellow sheets, go to the website. If you're on Zoom, we're going to pause for a couple of minutes while you do that right now. And we're going to collect the yellow sheets right now. Okay, in the name of Q&A, I know we still have 37 seconds left on our timer, but let's move on to the question and answer time. So Julie, if you don't mind advancing the slide. Oh, there we go. If you are, so we have a few minutes for audience questions, not much time, but if you are in person, you cannot put anything in the chat, obviously, so you can text it to this number. Keith Glidewell is on the other end of that number to receive your questions, or you can put it right in the Zoom chat. We're going to leave the number up just for like a minute, so if you need more time that you could take a picture of it. And I am now going to pass it over to Keith, and he is going to ask some of our audience questions.
So some of the things, Representative Morey, you mentioned the Medicaid expansion getting passed finally, which is great. But what shenanigans are we expecting to be pulled? What kind of poison pills or what do you think will have to be done to actually get the budget passed and to get Medicaid expansion pushed through? Hope you're muted on that end.
You got me now?
Yep, thank you.
Passing the budget is not just about numbers. It'll be about policy. They will try and put as much policy that is distasteful to us as possible. So we're going to have to look at that and we're going to have to weigh it. But, you know, this huge carrot of the Medicaid expansion is going to trump most anything bad they can put in policy. So we'll just be mindful. We'll be watching and see what happens.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked, maybe Representative Jeffers, you could take this one, but do you, or you could pass it on, do you feel like you have any real power down there?
I never feel like I have any power, but no, I think Representative Morey said it best. I mean, we were just playing a lot of defense. I was at an event last night for 8 of us new freshmen that were supported by some other groups. They called us the Elite 8. So we made the whole basketball analogy. And I said, you know, we're really on defense and we're just trying to keep them from scoring. And I think the best that we can do to make some of this bad legislation just a tad bit better or not as bad, then I think that's kind of where we are right now.
Okay, thank you. The other thing, Senator Murdock, the Supreme Court is looking at Moore versus Harper, the independent state legislator theory. If that passes, what are our next steps to help protect voting rights?
Yeah, we'll see. You know, luckily we have two attorneys on. I think the oral arguments could have went worse. So that was just me. You know, I think we know that some of the justices think it goes a little far. But I mean, we still will just have to weigh it out. I think it was what the last few weeks they say they may or may not table it, but I don't think it will move forward kind of with as broad of a perspective as it could have, but it's still concerning because it will have national implications. It's not just North Carolina. There are a lot of other states that would really take advantage of that if it were to move forward. But again, it really is just another testament to elections matter, you know, particularly when it comes to our courts. I mean, these are judges that started at other levels, you know, so we have just got, which we are, luckily, President Biden is doing a much better job of being more aggressive with those appointments. But we just, the long term is we have got to get a handle on the courts. I think even here in North Carolina, to take until 2028 for us to gain a majority again. So very, very, very concerning at a minimum. It will definitely have an impact on our maps and how we move forward and if they can even be challenged. So in my opinion, gross overreach, but we'll just have to continue to see what happens, you know, when they convene this summer. But if any other folks that have been following it closely want to chime in.
Okay, thank you. One other question we have, maybe Representative Lofton, you could take this, is we have the Leandro that was passed by the Supreme Court and then quickly overridden, which threatens our school funding. We also have charter schools, a lot of people pushing charter schools, which is also siphoning away school funding. What can we do to protect school funding?
I think that's going to be one of the critical issues in the budget that's coming up. So I think one of the things that I'll be looking for, I think we'll all be looking for, is to see if we're going to make any progress in helping to close that gap. We have teacher shortages by districts all across our state. My kids have suffered from that teacher shortage. Parents all across the state are dealing with that. My son just lost his math teacher. First he didn't have one, then he had one. Now he just lost it, and he has to sit in the classroom and listen on Zoom to the teacher across the hall who's teaching their class across the hall. And that's how he's trying to learn math right now. So I think we need more parents to raise those concerns and let those stories be heard. And we have the ability to do something about that. I think, we can get caught up talking about, the history of the Leandro case and go into the ins and outs of the case itself, but lose sight of the fact of what we're talking about is investing in our kids and making sure that when we take them to school, that there will be a well-trained, qualified teacher in front of them, helping them to learn and reach their potential. And that goes not just for K-12, but also early childhood education as well. So these are things we have the capacity to fix and to make progress on, and we just have to make sure we push them to make it a priority.
Just add to that, being a former county commissioner, the responsibility lies with the state, but the advocacy needs to start at the counties, because until those county commissioners start coming to Raleigh and talk about that they cannot make up that difference that the state is not sending, and that they have, in Person County, we have schools that are 70 years old. I mean, the same windows that, not only that I had, but when my grandmother was teaching there. And so until they start standing up and talk about the needs and that they cannot afford to take up the slack of the state, I think that's where it's going to have to start.
And I'd also add one simple fix we could do, and it's the governor's budget: don't repeal the corporate tax. No one has asked for it. 2.5% corporate tax is going to be repealed by 2030. We're going to lose $1 billion of revenue. That can fund Andrew more. So I think that's a big push. Do not repeal it. Don't raise it. Don't lower it. Keep it where it is. Simple things.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Keith, thank you so much. And thank you so much, Senator Murdock, Representative Morey, Representative Lofton, Representative Jeffers, for taking this time and for fighting so hard for us in Raleigh. We are with you. Susan, thank you for moderating the discussion. We got quite a lot in. And Jonah, thank you for the introductions. And to the NOC crew that worked really hard on getting this event pulled off, thank you so much to all of you. It's wonderful to see everyone tonight. Shout out to the folks at the Ale House and Seymour Center. Hope you guys had as much fun over there as we did over here in Chatham. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you so much. Good night.